You woke up today, you had your breakfast and walked to the kitchen, and now it feels like you have run a marathon. This is the stroke fatigue paradox, or the cerebrovascular accident fatigue paradox. Most people think that recovery after a stroke occurs within the muscles, but in reality, recovery occurs or starts from the brain. If you are tired of being tired, walk with me throughout this journey as we walk through the clinical roadmap to clear the brain fog that occurs after a stroke. Point one is that your brain is now an inefficient engine. Normally, the brain uses about 20% of the energy. After a stroke, performing simple tasks like speaking, writing, walking, or even brushing your teeth becomes difficult. Think of it like a GPS that is trying to find its route again. It takes 10 times more energy than the normal. So this is what happens in stroke. The brain pathways that were responsible for the simple tasks have already been damaged, and this will lead to your brain using more energy in order to do those simple tasks. And that is why we say that you have an inefficient engine. That is, you have an inefficient brain that has lost its normal pathways that makes the simple task feel like doing more complex activities that the brain is not used to. Point two is that you have a smaller battery. What this means is that the battery is like your brain capacity, your cognitive load. So before you had a stroke, you could be able to perform activities even up to more than 16 hours in a day. But currently, performing even 4 hours a day feels like a challenge. What this means is that every simple conversations, every simple tasks feel like you are giving your brain complex activities that it cannot manage. It means that you are draining up your brain. So what you should know is that if you feel fatigue, it is a warning to restructure the program and not to continue in the same pattern. And fatigue is a warning while pain is information. So every time you feel fatigue after performing an activity, then you should know that it is time to restructure the program. Point three is that you must stop before the drop. So the biggest mistake in rehab is doing or overdoing the activities, leaving the brain with no ability to retain the learned activities. So every time an activity is done, it should not use more than 80% of the energy. So if you find yourself using more than 80% of the energy, then it means that you are impairing your brain's capacity or ability to retain the learned information, and therefore you should not go beyond 80% of the energy. Remember, before, the brain only required 20% of the energy, but right now using 20% of the energy is impossible. That is why, in as much as you are doing the activities, in as much as you are focusing on intensity, on repetition, and on task-specific training, you should be able to know that when it reaches the point where you have used 80% of the energy, then it is now imperative that you stop the activities and let the brain consume all the information that has been learned. Remember that we are trying to rebuild the lost or the degenerated pathways through the principle of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to adapt and repair itself and reorganize itself following a neurological injury like a stroke. Point 4 is that you should fuel the brain through metabolic priming. So this is through the concept of the Soleus Pushup. So your brain requires energy, that is glucose, in order for it to function. And earlier, before the damage, it only required around 20% of the energy. So research has shown that the use of the soleus muscle is found within the calf, is one of the calf muscle found in the calf region. So research has shown that the soleus muscle is a very good metabolic muscle. So involving the soleus muscle through the soleus push-ups while sitting, that is, you lift your heels up and down while you are sitting, especially post meals, is important in the metabolic activity of the brain. What it does is that it helps in the usage of glucose, and remember that your brain requires energy. So with the usage of glucose, the soleus will be able to increase the glucose supply to the brain. And another thing with the soleus muscle is that as it acts through the soleus push-ups, you are able to increase the circulation of the oxygen and the blood to the brain tissue. So that is why we also connect it with the Soleus push-up. Very good for metabolic priming. So it is the easiest way to charge your metabolic pathway. The easiest way to charge your metabolic pathway. All you need to do is to just sit down and engage in doing the Soleus push-ups. Point 5 is that you need scheduled shutdowns. So this is not a nap. It is not sleeping. It is a sensory boost. So around 15 minutes a day after activities, with no music, no light, no phone, no sound, this will allow your brain to recalculate and to cool down after the activities. So doing this 3 times a day is very healthy for your brain processing the information that you have acquired. Remember that we are trying to manage the load in order to master the movement. So if we have done an activity, all we need to do is to manage the load. Then we can now master the movement. Remember, we are trying to retrain the brain to learn simple tasks like eating, like speaking, like talking, like walking. So with this, we need to manage the load in order for us to master the movement. So fatigue is not your destiny. It is the current state of your neural economy. You should start by tracking your battery today, that is tracking the energy that you use within the brain in order for you to function with your stroke. And if you found this helpful, thank you for watching.